The sound echoed through Judge Judy's courtroom like a thunderclap. A 380-pound woman had just hit the floor with such force that the bailiff's first instinct was to check if something had structurally failed in the building. Karen Denise Patterson lay sprawled across the courtroom tile, her designer purse contents scattered like shrapnel, her face a mask of shock and disbelief as paramedics rushed to her side. But this wasn't a medical emergency. This was the moment when crushing reality had finally broken through years of entitlement and arrogance. What had Judge Judy just revealed that could cause such a spectacular collapse? The answer would become the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared over 50 million times across every social media platform imaginable. Karen had walked into that courtroom 20 minutes earlier with absolute confidence, flanked by what she believed was her secret weapon. A sharp-dressed attorney who would finally put that uppity personal trainer in his place. She had paid good money for the best legal representation, or so she thought. She had no idea that Judge Judy had spent her morning making phone calls to the California State Bar, to police departments, and to fraud investigation units. She had no idea that the man sitting beside her in that expensive suit was about to be exposed as one of the most brazen con artists to ever step foot in a courtroom. And she definitely had no idea that her own arrogance would be the final ingredient in her complete and total destruction. Before we show you exactly what Judge Judy uncovered about Karen's so-called lawyer, before we reveal the devastating evidence that brought this entitled woman literally to her knees, you need to hit that like button right now. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a courtroom case. This is a masterclass in how karma works when you think you're too smart to get caught. This is what happens when you try to buy your way out of consequences and discover that justice can't be fooled by expensive suits and fake credentials. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell because trust me, the next 20 minutes will restore your faith that bullies and fraudsters always get exactly what they deserve. The reveal that destroyed Karen's world forever is coming up, and you won't believe what this fake lawyer thought he could get away with in front of America's toughest judge. Karen Denise Patterson had spent 48 years perfecting the art of getting her way through sheer force of personality and the strategic deployment of her considerable physical presence. At 380 pounds, she had learned early that taking up space, both literally and figuratively, could intimidate most people into submission. She was the kind of woman who would park her massive SUV across two spaces at the grocery store and dare anyone to say something about it. The kind of customer who demanded to speak to managers so frequently that several local businesses had her photo behind the counter with notes about her complaint history. Her former employees at the retail stores she had managed over the years described her as a nightmare boss who used her size and loud voice to create a workplace environment of constant fear and humiliation. But Karen saw herself completely differently. In her mind, she was simply someone who refused to accept substandard service or disrespect. She believed her standards were high and that most people were just too weak or too lazy to meet them. When she had hired Miguel Santos as her personal trainer 6 months ago, she had viewed it as an opportunity to whip another incompetent service provider into shape. Miguel came highly recommended, with an impressive client list and a small but successful training studio in a nice part of town. But from their very first session, Karen had treated him like hired help who existed solely to endure her criticism and cater to her demands. The problems had started immediately. Karen would show up late to sessions, sometimes by 30 or 40 minutes, and expect Miguel to still give her the full hour. She would spend half the training time on her phone, barking orders at him between calls. When Miguel tried to correct her form or suggest modifications to exercises, she would snap that she knew her own body and didn't need some gym rat telling her what to do. But the real issues went deeper and darker than mere rudeness. Karen had made comments about Miguel's accent, asking where he was really from and making assumptions about his immigration status despite the fact that he was born in Los Angeles. She had made inappropriate physical contact during sessions, touching his arms and chest in ways that made him visibly uncomfortable. And worst of all, after 6 sessions, she had simply stopped paying, claiming the training wasn't worth the money and threatening to leave bad reviews if he pursued payment. Miguel had tried everything to handle the situation professionally. He had sent polite invoices, then firmer collection notices. He had offered payment plans and even offered to part ways with no hard feelings if she would just pay for the sessions already completed. Karen's response had been to escalate her harassment. She had found his home address and shown up unannounced, pounding on his door and shouting that he was trying to scam her. She had called his other clients, trying to warn them that he was unprofessional. And when Miguel finally posted a vague statement on his business social media about having to establish firmer boundaries with difficult clients, Karen had become absolutely enraged. She was convinced the post was about her, which it partially was, and she decided that Miguel needed to be taught a lesson about who he was dealing with. That's when Karen had found Derek Williamson, or at least that's the name on his business card and website. His office was in a decent building, his website looked professional, and he had assured Karen that he handled defamation cases all the time. More importantly, he had told Karen exactly what she wanted to hear. That she had a strong case, that Miguel was clearly in the wrong, and that they would make him pay for disrespecting someone of her stature. Karen had paid him a $3,000 retainer up front, followed by monthly payments for consultations and case preparation. Over 6 months, she had given Derek Williamson $12,000, and in return, he had filled her head with legal terminology and confident predictions of victory. He had prepared her for this moment, assured her that Judge Judy would see things their way, and promised that his presence in the courtroom would intimidate Miguel into settling. As Karen walked into Judge Judy's courtroom that morning with Derek at her side, she felt invincible. Derek looked perfect for the part, a fitted charcoal suit that probably cost $800, a leather briefcase that gleamed under the courtroom lights, and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an intellectual air. He had a legal pad covered in notes and a confident demeanor that suggested he had done this 100 times before. Karen kept glancing at Miguel, who sat quietly on the other side with no lawyer, just a folder of documents and a nervous expression. She couldn't help but smirk. This was going to be easy. Miguel was about to learn what happened when you messed with someone who had resources and connections. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy's assistant had flagged something unusual during the routine background check of all parties involved in the case. Derek Williamson's bar registration had come back with no results. When they expanded the search, they found Derek Johnson, who had worked as a paralegal but had been terminated from his law firm 3 years ago. Judge Judy had personally made calls that morning, and what she had discovered had turned this from a simple small claims case into something much more serious. She had evidence in a folder on her bench, evidence that would expose not just one fraud, but 2 people who thought they could manipulate the system. As Karen settled into her seat, still radiating smug confidence, Judge Judy watched her with the patient interest of a predator who had already set the perfect trap. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her characteristic directness, her voice cutting through the courtroom atmosphere like a scalpel through silk. Ms. Patterson, you're suing Mr. Santos for $5,000, claiming defamation and emotional distress. Tell me what happened. It was a simple question, the kind Judge Judy had asked thousands of times in her decades on the bench. But Karen's response immediately signaled that this case was going to be anything but ordinary. Instead of a straightforward account of events, Karen launched into a theatrical performance that would have made soap opera actors cringe with its over-the-top delivery. Your Honor, this man completely destroyed my reputation through his reckless and negligent social media posts. Karen began, her voice dripping with the kind of manufactured outrage that came from years of practiced complaints. I hired him as my personal trainer, paid him good money, and treated him with nothing but respect and professionalism. And how does he repay me? By posting lies about me on the internet for all the world to see. As my attorney can confirm, this constitutes clear defamation under California law. She gestured dramatically toward Derek, who nodded with what he hoped looked like professional authority while shuffling papers in his briefcase. But Karen couldn't stick to just the facts. She had to editorialize, had to add layers of condescension and superiority that revealed far more about her character than she intended. She rolled her eyes when describing Miguel's training methods, using air quotes when she said the word professional. This man claimed to be a fitness expert, Your Honor, but he clearly had no idea how to work with clients of a certain size and stature. He was rude, he was dismissive, and frankly, he seemed more interested in looking at himself in the mirror than actually helping me achieve my fitness goals. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even without hearing Miguel's side, something about Karen's testimony felt off, too rehearsed, too focused on attacking rather than explaining. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, a warning sign that experienced viewers of her show knew meant trouble was beginning to brew. Ms. Patterson, she interrupted, her tone still professional but with an edge sharp enough to cut through Karen's performance. I didn't ask for your evaluation of his training methods. I asked what happened that led you to believe you were defamed. Stick to the facts, please. The correction was clear and firm, the kind of boundary setting that any reasonable person would have recognized as a signal to adjust their approach. But Karen, blinded by years of never facing consequences for her behavior, completely missed the warning. Instead of backing down, Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, the kind reserved for dealing with incompetent service workers who couldn't understand simple instructions. Well, if you'll let me finish my story, Your Honor, I was trying to explain the context of why his post was so damaging. You see, when someone like him, someone who doesn't exactly have a spotless reputation himself, posts about difficult clients, people automatically assume he's talking about me. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Karen had just sighed at Judge Judy, had just implied that the judge was interrupting her unfairly, had just suggested that she needed to be allowed to tell her story her way. Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair, her famous steely gaze locking onto Karen like a heat-seeking missile acquiring its target. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that made seasoned attorneys break out in cold sweats. "Did you just sigh at me in my courtroom?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread, ready to fall. Karen, incredibly, seemed to think this was still going according to her plan. She had brought her lawyer specifically to handle moments like this, to back her up when judges tried to push her around. She glanced at Derek, expecting support, and he gave her a small nod that she interpreted as encouragement to stand her ground. "I'm just trying to explain my case, Your Honor," Karen said, her tone taking on a defensive edge. "My attorney and I have prepared extensive documentation about how Mr. Santos's actions have caused me severe emotional distress and reputational harm. If we could just move forward with presenting our evidence, I think you'll see that this is a clear-cut case of defamation." She said it with the confidence of someone who had spent 6 months being told by her fake lawyer that she had an airtight case, that judges would see things her way, that her money and preparation made her untouchable. Judge Judy made a note on her pad, her expression unreadable, then turned her attention to Miguel Santos. "Mr. Santos, tell me your version of events." Miguel sat up straighter, clearly nervous but determined to tell his truth. "Your Honor, I trained Ms. Patterson for 6 weeks, a total of 6 sessions. From the very first session, she was disrespectful and inappropriate. She would show up extremely late, sometimes 40 minutes late, but still expect a full hour. She refused to follow basic instructions about form and safety. And she made comments about my background and appearance that made me very uncomfortable." His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had endured months of harassment and was finally getting to speak his truth. "But the real problem, Your Honor, was that after 6 sessions, she refused to pay. I sent her invoices, offered payment plans, and tried everything to resolve it professionally. Instead, she escalated. She found my home address and showed up at my house, screaming at me in front of my neighbors. She called my other clients trying to turn them against me. When I made a general post about needing to set boundaries with difficult clients, she assumed it was about her and decided to sue me." Miguel pulled out his phone, showing text message screenshots. "These are messages she sent me, Your Honor. Threats, insults, and accusations. I never mentioned her name in any public post. I never defamed her. I just wanted to be paid for my work and to be left alone." Karen literally laughed during Miguel's testimony, a sharp, dismissive bark of derision that echoed through the courtroom. "Oh please," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should be grateful I even hired you in the first place. Do you know how many trainers would kill for clients who can actually afford to pay premium rates? The fact that you couldn't handle one strong-willed client says everything about your lack of professionalism." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed further, watching Karen dig her hole deeper with every word. "And as for showing up at your house, I was trying to resolve our dispute like an adult instead of hiding behind lawyers like you're doing now." The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who had brought a lawyer to small claims court specifically to intimidate her opponent, was apparently lost on Karen entirely. She sat back in her chair with her arms crossed, radiating smug satisfaction. This was going exactly as Derek had promised it would. She was standing up for herself, showing this judge that she wasn't someone to be pushed around, and making it clear that Miguel was a whiny, unprofessional victim who couldn't handle a client with standards. What Karen failed to notice was the way Judge Judy's attention had shifted to Derek, the way those sharp eyes were now examining him with the intensity of a surgeon looking for the exact point to make an incision. The trap was set, and Judge Judy was about to spring it with devastating precision. Judge Judy shifted her attention fully to Derek Williamson, or the man claiming to be Derek Williamson, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. Her expression remained neutral, but anyone who had watched her show for any length of time recognized the subtle shift in her posture, the slight tilt of her head, the way her fingers steepled in front of her. This was the moment before the storm, the calm that preceded absolute destruction. "Mr. Williamson," she began, her voice carrying a deceptive gentleness that made what was coming even more terrifying. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about your representation of Ms. Patterson in this matter." Derek shifted in his seat, straightening his tie with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Your Honor. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have." His voice carried practiced confidence, but there was an edge of uncertainty creeping in, a sense that something wasn't quite right about the way this judge was looking at him. Karen, sitting beside him, still radiated absolute confidence. She had paid top dollar for this attorney, and now Judge Judy would see exactly why Derek Williamson was worth every penny of that $12,000. "Let's start with something simple," Judge Judy continued, pulling out a legal pad and pen as if she were merely taking notes for her own records. "Where did you receive your law degree, Mr. Williamson?" The question seemed straightforward enough, the kind of basic background inquiry that any judge might make. Derek's answer came smoothly, rehearsed from months of telling the same lie to different clients. "I graduated from Southwestern Law School, Your Honor, class of 2012. He said it with the easy confidence of someone who had told this particular lie so many times that it felt like truth. "Southwestern Law School," Judge Judy repeated, writing something down. "And you're licensed to practice law in which states?" Derek nodded, his confidence building as he navigated these familiar questions. "I'm licensed in California and New York, Your Honor. I maintain active status in both jurisdictions." Karen smiled beside him, pleased that her attorney was handling Judge Judy's questions so professionally. This was exactly what she had hoped for, a show of legal credibility that would make it clear that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. "What year were you admitted to the California State Bar, Mr. Williamson?" Judge Judy's pen continued to move across her legal pad, her eyes never leaving Derek's face. He swallowed hard, his first visible sign of discomfort. 2015, Your Honor. 3 years after graduation. I spent some time working as a clerk before taking the bar exam." The lie came out smoothly enough, but something in his body language had changed. His shoulders had tensed, his breathing had become slightly more rapid, and his eyes kept darting to the folder on Judge Judy's desk. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, that dangerous smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the expression that her regular viewers had learned to recognize as the prelude to someone's complete annihilation. "Mr. Williamson, have you reviewed all the discovery materials in this case? Have you examined the evidence that Mr. Santos has provided, including the text messages, the payment records, and the timeline of events?" Derek fumbled with his briefcase, pulling out papers with hands that were now visibly shaking. "Yes, Your Honor, I've reviewed everything thoroughly. We're prepared to demonstrate that Ms. Patterson has been the victim of a calculated campaign of defamation." "Then perhaps you can explain to me," Judge Judy said, her voice taking on an edge that could cut through steel, "why you didn't file a motion to dismiss based on the statute of limitations for defamation claims in California." The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and Derek's face went from confident to confused in the span of a heartbeat. He stared at Judge Judy, then down at his papers, shuffling through them frantically as if the answer might be hidden somewhere in his notes. I felt that wasn't the strongest legal approach in this particular case, Your Honor. We wanted to focus on the merits rather than procedural technicalities." "Really?" Judge Judy's eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief. "Because any first-year law student would know that in California, you have 1 year to file a defamation claim from the date of publication. Mr. Santos made his social media post 8 months ago. You would have been well within the statute of limitations, and it would have been standard practice to at least consider that motion as part of your strategy. So why didn't you?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, no words coming out, just the desperate attempt to formulate an answer that would satisfy this increasingly hostile line of questioning. Karen, sitting beside her supposed legal champion, felt the first stirrings of genuine unease. She nudged Derek with her elbow, her voice a harsh whisper that the courtroom microphones picked up clearly. "What is she talking about? You said we had a strong case." Derek, still shuffling papers, whispered back without looking at her. "It's fine, she's just trying to intimidate us. Stay calm." But the sweat beading on his forehead and the tremor in his hands told a very different story than his reassuring words. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "Let me ask you something else, Mr. Williamson. In your review of the evidence, did you advise your client about the potential risks of bringing this lawsuit?" Did you explain to her that malicious prosecution or abuse of process could result in sanctions? Did you discuss the possibility that Mr. Santos might file a countersuit for harassment? These were basic questions, the kind of risk assessment that any competent attorney would discuss with a client before filing a lawsuit. Derek's answer became more vague, more desperate. We discussed various scenarios, Your Honor. I believe we've taken a measured approach to this litigation. A measured approach, Judge Judy repeated, her voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Williamson, can you explain to this court the difference between defamation per se and defamation per quote under California law? The question was a direct challenge, a test that any licensed attorney could answer in their sleep. Derek's face had gone from nervous to pale, from pale to ashen. He opened his mouth several times, each time failing to produce a coherent answer. Well, Your Honor, defamation per se is, it's when the statement is, inherently defamatory, and defamation per quote is, when you need to prove additional facts, and, His voice trailed off into incomprehensible mumbling. Ms. Patterson, Judge Judy said, turning her laser focus to Karen, who was now staring at Derek with growing horror. Does your attorney know what he's doing? The question was simple, but it carried implications that were starting to penetrate even Karen's thick wall of confidence. Of course he does, Karen snapped back, her voice rising defensively. He's the best lawyer money can buy. He's been handling my case for 6 months. You're just trying to intimidate us because you know we have a strong case against that man. She pointed at Miguel, trying to redirect attention back to her original target. 6 months, Judge Judy said softly, almost to herself, as she opened the thick folder on her desk. She pulled out several documents, each one a piece of evidence in the trap she had been carefully constructing since the moment Derek had identified himself as an attorney. Ms. Patterson, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about your representation in this case. And Mr. Williamson, or whoever you really are, I think it's time we discussed exactly who you are and what you've been doing for the last 6 months. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the audience members who usually whispered among themselves had fallen into stunned silence. Karen's confident smile had finally begun to crack, replaced by the first genuine fear she had felt since walking into that courtroom. Derek looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting between Judge Judy, the bailiff, and the exit doors. And Judge Judy, America's most feared television judge, was about to deliver a revelation that would destroy both of them in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The trap had been sprung, and there was no escape. Judge Judy lifted the first document from her folder with the deliberate precision of a prosecutor presenting the murder weapon in a capital case. Her eyes locked onto the man sitting next to Karen, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority mixed with barely restrained fury. Mr. Derek Williamson, she began, pausing for dramatic effect. Or should I say, Mr. Derek Johnson? The name hung in the air like a death sentence, and the color drained from Derek's face so quickly that he looked like he might pass out on the spot. What? Karen's voice came out as a strangled whisper, her head whipping toward the man she had trusted with $12,000 and her entire legal strategy. What is she talking about, Derek? What does she mean, Derek Johnson? But Derek couldn't answer. He sat frozen in his chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time as millions of viewers watched his destruction unfold on national television. Judge Judy continued, her voice growing stronger and more damning with each word. Derek Johnson is not a licensed attorney in California, New York, or any other state in this country. He does not have a law degree from Southwestern Law School or any other accredited institution. In fact, Mr. Johnson applied to Southwestern Law School twice and was rejected both times due to failing entrance exam scores. She held up the documents, showing them to the camera and the courtroom. I have here the admission records from Southwestern Law School confirming that no Derek Williamson graduated in 2012, and that Derek Johnson was denied admission in 2009 and again in 2011. Karen's breathing became rapid and shallow, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as the implications began to penetrate her consciousness. No, she said, shaking her head violently. No, this is ridiculous. Derek, tell her she's wrong. Show her your credentials. You showed me your bar certificate. You have an office. You have a website. Tell her. But Derek remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze as his entire criminal enterprise collapsed around him. Judge Judy wasn't finished with her systematic destruction of Derek's fraudulent identity. Mr. Johnson did work in the legal field, she continued, her voice dripping with contempt. He was employed as a paralegal at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm in downtown Los Angeles. He was terminated from that position 3 years ago for forging attorney signatures on legal documents and misrepresenting himself to clients as a licensed lawyer. She held up another document. I have his termination letter right here, along with a police report filed by the firm when they discovered his fraudulent activities. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. The bailiff took a step closer to Derek, his hand moving instinctively toward his duty belt. Karen looked like she had been physically struck, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly that it was impossible to pin down any single feeling. Shock, betrayal, rage, and fear all competed for dominance on her features. This can't be real, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. This can't be happening. But Judge Judy had even more devastating evidence to present. After being fired from Henderson and Associates, Mr. Johnson set up a fake law practice. He rented an office in a shared workspace building, created a professional-looking website using stock photos and fabricated credentials, and began soliciting clients who needed legal representation. She pulled out printed screenshots of the website, showing a professional headshot that was clearly a stock photo, testimonials from clients who didn't exist, and credentials from law schools that had never heard of him. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Johnson has defrauded at least 9 clients that we know of, taking their money for legal services he was not qualified or licensed to provide. Karen made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. 9. She repeated. 9 other people. Her mind was racing, trying to calculate how many others had been sitting where she was sitting now, trusting this man with their legal problems and their money. How many other people had paid him thousands of dollars, believing he was going to fight for them in court, only to discover they had been victims of an elaborate con. Judge Judy held up a sheaf of bank statements and payment records. Ms. Patterson, according to these financial records that we subpoenaed this morning, you have paid Derek Johnson $12,000 over the past 6 months. $3,000 as an initial retainer, followed by monthly payments of $1,500 for consultations, case preparation, and legal representation. None of that money went into a client trust account, as would be required for a legitimate attorney. All of it went directly into Mr. Johnson's personal checking account, where he used it to pay his rent, buy expensive clothes, and maintain the appearance of a successful lawyer. $12,000. The number echoed in Karen's head like a bell tolling her doom. She had paid $12,000 to a fake lawyer. She had bragged to her friends about having the best legal representation money could buy. She had walked into this courtroom with absolute confidence, certain that her attorney would destroy Miguel Santos and teach him a lesson about respecting his betters. And all of it, every single bit of it, had been a lie. She had been conned, scammed, defrauded by a paralegal who had been fired for the exact same behavior he had perpetrated against her. Judge Judy turned her attention fully to Derek, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Mr. Johnson, you are currently under investigation by the California State Bar for the unauthorized practice of law. You have active warrants in 2 counties for fraud and grand theft. And as of this moment, you are in contempt of this court for misrepresenting yourself as a licensed attorney. She gestured to the bailiff. Officer, please detain Mr. Johnson. He will be turned over to the proper authorities for prosecution. The bailiff moved quickly, pulling Derek to his feet and securing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. Derek finally found his voice, and it came out as a pathetic whimper. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed money, and these people were so easy to convince. I thought I could help them. I thought if I just acted like a lawyer, I could figure it out. His confession tumbled out in a desperate stream, each word another nail in his coffin. Karen stared at him with undisguised hatred as the bailiff led him toward the door. As Derek was escorted from the courtroom, Judge Judy turned her full attention back to Karen, who sat in stunned silence, her entire world crumbling around her. Ms. Patterson, your case against Mr. Santos is dismissed immediately. You came into my courtroom with fraudulent representation, which invalidates these proceedings entirely. More importantly, you will be lucky if you don't face criminal charges yourself as an accessory to Mr. Johnson's fraud. The district attorney's office will be reviewing your involvement to determine if you knew or should have known that your so-called attorney was not licensed to practice law. Karen tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her like an avalanche. She had lost $12,000. Her lawsuit was dismissed. She might face criminal charges. And worst of all, she had been exposed on national television as someone so arrogant and foolish that she had been conned by a fake lawyer for 6 months without ever bothering to verify his credentials. Every friend she had bragged to, every neighbor she had told about her lawsuit, every person who would see this episode would know that Karen Patterson had been played for a fool. Judge Judy's final words before turning to Miguel were delivered with the cold finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Mr. Santos, you are free to file a countersuit against Ms. Patterson for harassment, emotional distress, and any other damages you have suffered from her campaign against you. I suggest you find yourself a real attorney, one who is actually licensed to practice law. This court stands adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder, and Karen Denise Patterson's world went completely black as the full weight of her humiliation became too much for her consciousness to bear. The collapse happened so fast that the bailiff barely had time to react. Karen's breathing had become increasingly rapid and shallow as Judge Judy delivered her final ruling. Her face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light, from red to white to a sickly gray. She tried to stand, her legs shaking violently beneath her considerable weight, and then her eyes rolled back and she went down. The sound of 380 pounds hitting the courtroom floor reverberated through the building like a small earthquake. Her designer purse flew across the floor, spilling its contents in a humiliating scatter of lipsticks, breath mints, and the receipts for $12,000 in payments to a fake lawyer. Court staff rushed to her side as the cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of her spectacular downfall. Paramedics were called, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't a heart attack or stroke. This was a panic attack of epic proportions, the complete psychological breakdown of a woman who had just discovered that her arrogance had cost her everything. As Karen was loaded onto a stretcher, still conscious but sobbing uncontrollably, Miguel Santos sat quietly in his chair, vindicated after months of harassment and abuse. The video went viral within hours, exploding across every social media platform with the hashtag #FakeLawyerKaren trending worldwide for 4 straight days. News outlets picked up the story, legal experts weighed in on the dangers of unlicensed legal practice, and Derek Johnson's other victims began coming forward. 8 more people had been scammed by his fake law practice, bringing his total fraud to over $87,000. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison in order to pay full restitution, though most victims never recovered their money. Karen's life unraveled completely in the aftermath. She lost her job when the viral video made her unemployable, her friends abandoned her after seeing her racist and abusive behavior on display, and Miguel filed a successful countersuit that awarded him $8,500 in damages. She was forced to sell her SUV and move to a smaller apartment, her dreams of superiority replaced by the reality of being internet famous for all the wrong reasons. The $12,000 she had paid Derek was never recovered. Miguel Santos, on the other hand, saw his business explode with supportive clients who admired his dignity and professionalism throughout the ordeal. He used his settlement money to open a second training location and became an advocate for service workers dealing with abusive clients. Judge Judy's handling of the case became legendary in legal circles, a masterclass in investigative justice that exposed not just one fraud but 2 people who thought they could manipulate the system. The lesson was crystal clear: arrogance, entitlement, and fraud always catch up with you eventually. And when they do, the fall is spectacular, public, and absolutely deserved.